Good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming out tonight. My name is Jen Holland. I'm the PTA president for Council, PTA Council for the Cleveland High School District. We decided to have a speaker series every other month based off of our executive board meetings, just to kind of spice things up and to bring awareness to the community. So we thank you guys for coming out tonight. I would like to introduce Lisa Hunt. She's our Family Engagement Director for the CHUH School District. So if you would like to come up to talk a little bit about the School of Excellence. She does partner with PTA Council on a lot of things, and we are glad to have her. So, Lisa?
Thanks, Ms. Jen. All right, so I'm definitely not the director. I would like to aspire to that maybe. And then they titled it as specialist. I don't consider myself that either. And I do consider myself to be as a parent in support of family engagement in our district. So this is just one of these wonderful opportunities to thank PTA Council for what they do. I think it's great when we can come together, spend a little bit of time together, and learn together. And also support each other. So thank you, PTA Council, for what you do. Again, like Jen said, I support family engagement in our district. One of the things that's great this year is probably a rare time in my remembrance, we're all working on something together. So PTA Excellence is the National Schools of PTA Excellence, and it's a program, it's pre-prescribed, but what it does is it asks us to ask others how they feel about family engagement in our district. This is so weird to have this in my face. So asking other people about family engagement in our district, it asks you to gauge perception of all stakeholders, our students, our parents, our teachers, our administrators, and that's just the first step. Because once we get through the process, what we would then do is find out how to support building level improvement plans. How many of us know every building has one? Half, not even, a couple of people in the audience, 3. You're a teacher, Julie, that's not fair. So how will we get the biggest bang for our buck to level that engagement and support those improvement plans? And that's really what the National PTA Schools of Excellence program does. It works to galvanize us. So I'm really excited that we have many of our schools tackling this. I brought surveys this evening. Jordan, my son, is back there. He's been passing them out. If you don't want to do it paper-based, I get it. Sometimes you want to be in the moment and not work on something, working on something separately. I will send it to you electronically if you give me your email address. I'm sure PTA Council will help circulate it. But again, it's to gauge your perception. So answer them authentically. This is the first step. It's based on every school that is participating, so I'm not just here for my own high-tie PTA, but I'm also looking at across the district. So thank you for letting me come and share that. At the end of the day, hopefully we'll all get these big, wonderful banners that say we are National PTA Schools of Excellence, because what it means is that PTAs are partnering with our schools in the improvement. You can also get about $2,000 worth of cold hard cash, it doesn't hurt either. But it's also a 2-year designation. So year-long process, we have the banner for 2 years, and again, what it demonstrates is that we're asking and engaging other partners. So thank you. I'd like to introduce Joan Spurl.
Hello, yes, and I am Vice President of PTA Council, and I get to introduce our speaker tonight. So as Jen was saying, PTA Council and all PTAs are here to bring us together to support families and children in our district. And there's strength in numbers, so we invite you to join us if you're not already a PTA member. But equally important is the way you support your child at home. So we want to support you in that process, and thus here we are tonight with our speaker Sherry Naxon. Sherry, I should, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. Did I get the last name right? Yeah, so okay. Anyway, I know I value her highly. She's helped many families through tricky times as a child therapist and a social worker, and she's an engaged, thoughtful, empathetic mother, community member, and citizen, and I think is going to be a great help to all of us here tonight. And as you may have figured out, we're filming this, so we're going to be able to make this available to other families who couldn't actually be here in person. And we're going to try to do that more and more in this district, so that, because not everyone's schedules match up. And we want to meet people where they are. Oh, one other thing is we welcome your feedback, your input, your suggestions, ideas, concerns. There's a little container in the back where you can put those. But please know that we would love to hear from you about what more we can do together to support all of you and your children. Thank you, Sherry.
I'm not great with microphones and I may walk away accidentally, so I apologize for that in advance. I do a lot of talks in the community about parenting and how we can all connect with our kids in better ways. What I notice is everyone wants the best for their kids, and that's something that's universal. It cuts across all lines. And so part of what Joan and I talked about in preparing for tonight was a way to kind of go over some helpful child development concepts, and also though to take advantage of your time, because I know as a parent what it feels like. You do all the work to get here, to be here for an hour, and then you will have a really good talk and you'll have some great ideas, and then you're going to get in your car and you're going to realize whatever you're going home to, and then you're going to go home and whatever slip of paper I hand you is somewhere in the bottom of your bag, and at some point you'll be like, oh, I'm so frustrated with my kids and that lady said something and I can't remember what it was. So I try and take all that into account, that we appreciate your time, what it takes to step away from your family in the evening, especially with everyone having long work days, long school days, doing homework. So stepping away is meaningful. And so when you come and spend time with me, I want to make sure that you walk out with something actionable. And so that is going to be on my mind. And we'll make sure that you have a takeaway, that's something that you can implement. It would help me a lot just to kind of get a feel for the ages of your kids. So if I could have a show of hands, how many of you have kids in grades kindergarten to 3? Okay, great. And 4 and 5 is upper elementary, right? So, great. And then middle school and high school. Okay, so we're kind of equally balanced, except for high school's a little smaller. I'm going to try hard to speak to everyone, but I'll be honest with you that there's so much we could talk about with each age, and we're going to talk about general concepts as best we can. So there's a saying, and it's a British saying, it says, start as you mean to go. And I think that that's one of the tenets that I really believe in about parenting, is really to think ahead about what's your end goal, and really picturing what is it that you really want? And the best way that I've found to do this is this exercise where I'm going to ask you all to just take a minute and close your eyes, and there's no meditating, I promise. There's no meditating. Just picture in your mind one of the most awesome adults that you know, just somebody that you think really, really highly of, and just really think about what it is about them. As you're picturing that person, what are the qualities that they have that make them stellar? They're just amazing, amazing adults. Okay, you can open your eyes as you've got that. Does anybody want to share any of the qualities that they're thinking of? Go ahead. Caring. Go ahead.
Always calm.
Calm.
They're very calm.
Caring, calm.
Good listener.
Good listener.
Positive.
Okay. This is where the microphone's going to be tricky, but I'll try to write these up here. So we have caring, calm. Huh? We could. That's smart. Okay, my handwriting's so awful. Good handwriting. Good listener. And now, because we did that, I forgot the last one. What? Positive. Anything else?
Smart.
Smart.
Organized.
Very organized, yeah.
And problem solver.
Problem solver's a
Always,
big one.
I mean, listens when you want to be listened to, but then if you ask for help, always has solution options.
And great at time management too.
Okay.
Open-minded.
Not afraid to ask for help also.
Okay.
And hopeful.
That's a really good one too. Hopeful.
Helpful.
Helpful. Oh, did I write the wrong one?
Hopeful and helpful. Okay.
Well, because that kind of, I was thinking about that. Okay, so I mean, you can see there's some concrete things like that actionable part of problem solving, time management. Some of these are a quality, the open-mindedness, caring, not afraid to ask for help. Sometimes people talk about humility as part of that, right? Saying what you are good at and knowing what you're not good at is usually one of those qualities. That calmness, which we'll talk about, self-regulation is one of the big, that's what makes for a calm person. Like you don't just emerge into the world calm, you know, there's something happening there. So as we think about all of these traits, now I want you to kind of shift gears and think about your parenting and think about, well, what is it that you want your kid to be? If you were describing your kid, not today, you know what our kids are like today, but 5 years from now, 15 years from now, what are the qualities that would be most important to you? You know, are they these things? Are there other things? Go ahead. Kind. Okay. I'm gonna add those in a different color just for fun. Yeah.
Strong.
Strong. Sometimes I hear the word resilient.
Upstander.
An upstander.
Curious.
Self-motivated.
Yeah.
That's
Is that a high school parent?
Healthy.
mentally, spiritually,
Yes.
and physically. Not just-
Happy.
Yes.
Holistically healthy.
Yeah.
Loyal.
Loyal. That's a great one.
Respectful.
Respectful. Confident. And what were you saying?
Caring.
Okay.
Caring.
Up here.
I know we have that, but I want them to be caring even as we go through.
Yeah.
Dead serious. There's a lot of responsibility.
Responsible.
Have good character.
Yes.
Good character. Could you say more about that? Because that can mean different things to different people.
I can't think of the word I'm trying to say.
Integrity.
Yes.
Is that it?
That's the word.
Thank you.
So there's an ethics piece to that,
Yeah.
right? You know,
Ethical.
I think is a big piece of that. And one thing that hasn't, that I often hear and hasn't come up here, is in this idea is good boundaries, right? I mean, that's
Balanced. A
What?
balanced adult.
a balance, right? So,
There's no balance. You don't want them just one way or another. You want them balanced in their lifestyle.
right,
But also with boundaries, knowing that it's okay to say no.
right. So boundaries are so important, and that there's a lot of different ways that boundaries are important. But a part of that is having that ability to notice when somebody else has bad boundaries, and that you're assertive and able to say, this isn't okay. And so having that awareness about boundaries,
And being self-aware and keep it on.
self-awareness.
So,
What's a good adjective for make good choices? Make good choices, make good choices. I usually say that to my kids, I say a lot to, I work at school, and I'm like, make better choices.
Is that conscientious or?
I don't know what that is, yes. You can do what you can own it. So, I'm serious. You can handle the consequences, good or bad.
Right. So, now we have our perfect human. mapped out. So, and this is the problem, right? Like you want to raise your child to have all of these qualities, and we all aspire to have a lot of this, and you're only going to have some of this and some of that, or pieces are going to feel stronger at different times. And what do you do when, like, you have to work, your kids have to go to school, everybody needs to eat, your house needs to be taken care of at a minimum. Like, how in the world could you possibly make this happen? I mean, that's the problem, right? And so the next thing you know, it's, get your shoes on, get in the car, I don't want to hear about it, we're going to be late, and you're going to be late, and that's going to make me late, and I don't want to hear it. Or, could you just put your socks on so that, we can move on from this moment, or whatever it might be. Or, that you're after school and sport and homework, and there's actually no interaction because everybody's doing so much. And so, all of this drops off, or you save it for later, or you hope that somehow through osmosis your child is going to pick up all of these other things. And some of it happens. I mean, if your kids are an age where you're still reading to them, that time each day brings some of this because you're sharing the stories and talking about the qualities. But once you have older kids and you may not even get that, maybe it's just stuff in the news, or it's a conflict that they had at school with a teacher or with a friend, and because of discussing that, you get to talk about it. What I'd like you to do is to think about these, and it's going to be different for each of you, but just take a minute and really, really think about what are your top 3. Like, if you had no choice, like you just have to boil it down to 3, and the rest of it, is willy-nilly. What would your 3 things be? And that's a really personal decision. So I just want you to think for a couple minutes about that. And it might even be something for those of you who have a partner at home that you want to make sure to go back home and talk about this too, that you aren't doing that alone. But what are your 3 things? And if you want to, write these down or type them into your smartphone, or I have little cards and sticky notes here, because this is one of those things that I'm going to tell you, like, if you can boil it down to 3, this is a step ahead, and then we're going to talk about how do you keep those 3 things active. Does anybody want something to write on? You're doing okay. It's fine to use your smartphone for this, because this is...
What if it's different for your different kids?
That's a great point, and it may very well be different, and I think that's fine. I think individualizing it for your kids makes a lot of sense. And some of that has to do with what each of your kids is working on. And so you may have, your 3 things that, if nothing else, my home will produce adults who are truthful and have good boundaries and are kind, But because your child's personality, you might say, I need to stress being positive more with this child. Or actually, one thing that didn't come up here is generosity is often one of the traits that comes up. Yeah.
If you're kind to other people, more aware of what other people are going to, it's kind of hard to be kind and not being generous.
And the listener, there's a
Yeah,
lot of.
Right, these are tied together.
Yeah, it's kind of hard not to be.
Right, like these go together, being an upstander.
Yeah.
So a lot of these you would see where you can cluster them. But what you want to do is find out what are your 3 things, the 3 for you. And I'll give you an example, because it may be different. Like, say it's really important to you for your child to be true to themselves. That's always been one of my things, is like, I don't care what happens, but I want you to feel good in your own skin, and I want you to be true to yourself. Well, if you have two little kids and, one of them wants to play with the other one's toy, and one of the other one says, well, that's my favorite toy, I don't want to share it. If I'm trying to stress being true to yourself, I'm going to resolve that a lot differently than if I'm trying to stress generosity and sharing. And so that's where it becomes really important that you know what matters more to you, because those things don't happen in slow motion. They happen on the fly, and the next thing you know, you're settling it, and the way you settle it may not actually be your core value. You might be doing what's socially acceptable, you might be doing what's convenient, you might be doing what's going to be shortest, and you might be losing track of something else, or your kid walks into a family function and says, hey, Aunt Helen, your dress is really ugly, right? and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe you said that, that's not polite, da da da. Well, if honesty is one of your things, what lesson are you teaching if you shame your child for saying that somebody's dress was ugly? The lesson might be in when and where do we say certain things, and that's something you can tell me, but you shouldn't say it directly to Aunt Helen. And so it may be a lesson about social graces, but we don't want to teach our kids to hold in a feeling or an opinion. And that the reason we go that step is because you want them to come to you with difficult things. And if you want them to come to you with difficult things, they have to come to you with trivial things or embarrassing things or sometimes inappropriate things. And if your message is the door's always open, you want to pay attention to how you handle that. So the important thing here is to really just think about what are the things that are most important to you and what are most salient to you, and what do you want to win out when you're in these little day-to-day things. And then find a way to give yourself a reminder. And so what I usually say is, at this point, is now that you've thought about it a lot and you know what your 3 things are, what could you do over the next 2 weeks to help yourself remember the 3 things? And so I literally want you to take out your smartphone and write yourself a daily reminder with the 3 things, or if you prefer sticky notes or bookmark, or some people want it on their mirror, or whatever it may be, to actually give yourself a prompt that helps you remember what your priorities are, because it's in the day-to-day that we lose it, and I think that's the hardest part. And then we go to sleep at night and you're worried about your kids. Is this a phase? Are they gonna grow up and land where I really hope they'll be? No one listed like big earner or like top of the class, or it's not, and I love that. I do this exercise in a lot of different settings, and the qualities are the same. It cuts across every socioeconomic group that you can think of. It cuts across religion and every type of difference we might have, and no one lists the trivial things. And I think sometimes day-to-day pulls us into the trivial things. And so the gift that you can give yourself is coming up with a way, whether it's a code word or whatever the 3 things are, if you can zero it down to 1 and do 1 of these values for 2 weeks, and then do another one of your 3 values for another 2 weeks, and just notice if you remind yourself each morning what those values are, if you're able to integrate it into some of your day-to-day in small and large ways. And you may find that you do some things really, really different just because you're like, oh, that's right, I really want to stress honesty, or I want to focus on boundaries, and because it can become more prominent just by having that little reminder. So using that, then I'm going to move into some of the basic concepts that therapists rely on and educators often rely upon in terms of child development. And, I'm going to try really hard to speak to all ages. And if you have specific questions while I'm talking, that's great. And if you want to, we're going to do a Q&A at the end, so that's fine too. One of the biggest things that I learned in my training is to really focus on promoting mastery in all situations, that you err on the side of wanting the child to later on be able to do something independently. And so everything everything kind of takes this same path. And it's usually easiest to picture this with food, right? The baby, you feed the baby, and then the toddler starts to want to feed themselves, but you're right there. And sometimes you have 2 spoons going because they're feeding themselves and you're feeding them too. And then gradually you're backing out and they start to do it for themselves and they can manage it and they're eating but you stay around. They want you around at that point, right? They want you to see what they're doing. And potty training is another big one, right? Like all little kids want you to see them when they master using the potty. So that's a great example as well. Where for the infant, you just take care of them and you take care of all their bodily needs. And then with toddlerhood, like you're doing it kind of together and you start talking about it more because you're foreshadowing that they're going to get it and they're going to master it. But you still stick around to admire what they're doing. And some kids like praise, some kids just want to know that you know. And then there's trusting to do for themselves, that eventually your kid, goes to the bathroom and you don't even realize they went and they can't come back and their hands are washed and you're going about your day, and eventually they're highly functioning adults who use bathrooms all the time and nobody knows about it. So you can do it with anything. It's really helpful to think about this, especially, we're a little bit more familiar with how to do it with little kids. So those 2 examples I gave were really little. Homework is a great example for middle and high school students, because in the beginning, I tell you when to do the homework, this is where we do the homework, okay, it's time to do the homework, and they sit down and they do it. And then eventually, well, hopefully, or you're doing it together, letters and numbers are fun and whatever, and then you do it with, or maybe you're sitting side by side and you're working on something while they're working on something, and then eventually they're managing it themselves, or with monitoring the homework, right? So you go onto the website, you look up and you see the assignment, you check with your child, do you know what the homework is? I don't have any. Yes, you do, I looked it up, right? And then eventually, maybe you're looking it up together, or they get frustrated and eventually they start looking it up themselves. And then you're able to notice, hey, you're taking more responsibility for your homework. And you just say, do you have a lot of homework? And they say yes or no, and you believe them and they get it done, right? And if your kid isn't there yet, it'll come, right? But eventually they're gonna move on to other things and you're not even gonna know what they've been asked to do, and it's just gonna get done. They're gonna be an adult in a job who's got tasks that you have no idea what they are, or they're gonna be in a college course with a syllabus that you've never seen. And so everything goes along this line. And if your child is stuck somewhere or struggling with something that you think is age expectable, or the school is saying is age expectable and it's not happening, one way of looking at it is trying to figure out, where are they in this process? Are you expecting them to be here, but you and your child are like up here and you've been really involved? And so how are you going to build the scaffolding to get all the way at the end? Do you have something to say?
Well, just as a teacher and a mom, we just, like you said, we don't have a lot of time. We'll just do things quickly just because we want them to get done, and we don't take the time to go through that guided release because we just want to do it our way sometimes quickly.
Right.
And just get it done, and we don't let them take over.
Exactly.
And then we're stuck on step 2.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what happens. And
sometimes the kids push back. Yeah.
there is a mix, and sometimes they actually are ready to be more independent, and sometimes they're pushing back because that's their age, but they aren't actually capable of the step, and so you have to maybe build in more structures so that they can be as independent as they want to be, but they can also be successful with that independence. And that's, I think, the dance that we all wind up doing, is figuring out how much support do you need to become independent. Go ahead.
So, like, how would you go about I have 2 girls who just started middle school.
Mhm.
They're in 6th grade. They just finished the first quarter. I've spent the last week having them catch up on assignments that I would ask, do you have homework? And I'm online looking and seeing all the assignments that are missing that are not done. And they know they have these assignments. They know how to do them, yet still they're not doing it. I mean, are they overwhelmed? I don't know, because you know, they don't say, hey, I'm overwhelmed with this, you know, I mean, what kid comes to their parents and says that, you know, so how would you get them to the point where they are, you know, willfully participating and doing what they're supposed to do? You know, when you have multiple children like that, that are supposed to be doing what they're, you know, at that age, I mean, my
It's
kids are
really
11,
hard.
so.
Right, it is really hard, and that's a mix of time management and tools, like what structural tools can you put in place? You know, the planner and the online is supposed to solve everything, and it doesn't. It may be that you need to look at the website together within a half an hour of them coming in the door, so that then, and you can say this is part of time management. When you come home, you have 3 hours, and that includes dinner and shower, and so how are you going to spend your 3 hours? And so from now on, because you got so behind this time, we're going to check the website, but check it together and have them, and then maybe have them write down what the assignment is, or, you know, so that you have to figure it out. Each kid's different. It may be that you have to do it in the beginning, but your goal is to kind of wean yourself out of it.
Right.
But I think
Definitely.
for new middle schoolers, it's a lot. Switching subjects, having a different face and voice and personality for each subject is overwhelming for a lot of kids. Some kids are okay and some kids aren't. And so it could just even be all that switching.
Right.
And so I think it's also reasonable
Okay.
to have trouble juggling the workload, and that's part of, in a way, that's part of why I believe they put 6th grade into middle school, so that you kind of get a year of less consequences to master it, so that when the work gets a little bit more rigorous, and if anybody's a middle school teacher, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's a part of the logic, is giving them the chance to practice switching classrooms and switching teachers, and knowing that there's a learning curve on the homework. And so I think the other thing you can always do is foreshadow for them that it will get better. And that's one of those, I always call it like a Jedi mind trick, where you're just like, it will not stay this hard. You know? And if you say it out loud, and if you say to them, I know it feels bumpy, but it won't stay this hard. It's normal to have it be tricky, to juggle all of it. And some of you might say, oh, that's not my kid's issue. There's that much of a wide range of normal. But I think it's reasonable, but what you can do is maybe look for a family routine piece that you can add that supports the topic, and then also some time talking about time management. I know in my family we had to just talk about time management all the time, and I'm constantly like, okay, this many hours, how do you plan on spending your time? And some kids you have to repeat something like that 30 times before they integrate it, and other kids are like 3,000 times. And that's also the wide range of normal. And so that's something to know, that the repetition for one of your middle schoolers may be totally different than the other. And that's okay.
Awesome.
So as I was talking about this, I threw in a couple of other words that I find really helpful in thinking about child development. So the eating and toileting examples that I gave, another term for that is, the concept is called developmental lines. And that's actually, the doing for, doing with, standing by to admire is a concept that was by Erna Furman, who actually was a Cleveland Heights person, and she was at Hannah Perkins Center. The concept of developmental lines goes all the way back to Anna Freud. And basically anything, you can kind of chart out a line, you know, that it builds upon itself. And so we use this concept a lot with larger concepts like cognitive development or gross motor and fine motor development. But I also believe that you can apply it to some of these other things that might be more mundane, like even going from feeding to someday being able to grocery shop and cook and take care of yourself with food and enjoy food. So I like that idea a lot. I think that's my timer. Sorry about that. I find that concept really, really helpful to kind of draw out a picture. And going back to those ideas we had on the front page, how do you get from here to there, and seeing some continuity, because you want to be true to the end product all the way from the beginning. And so again, if you want your child to be able to feed themselves and to enjoy food, you can't yank utensils away from a toddler because it's messy when they feed themselves, right? And so we all learn to tolerate messiness, because we know in the end we want our kids to be able to enjoy these things and to also be able to do it themselves. And same thing with like bedrooms, right? Like in order for them to someday keep house themselves, they do have to have that space. That's a boundary thing too, but also the managing your stuff and how do you take care of your own stuff. And oh no, I didn't take care of my stuff and it broke and I'm sad or it's lost and I'm disappointed, and that's the natural consequence of all of it. And so it's really important to kind of look at the bigger picture. I think one of the things I see in our society is we sometimes become too compliance oriented, and kids need to sit down when we tell them to. Unfortunately, they need to go to the bathroom when we tell them to during the school day. I mean, in elementary, they don't always have the ability to go when they want to go. There's a lot of structure because of having kids in groups and because of our fast-paced society, and sometimes that makes us too compliance oriented. So really looking at what is the outcome that matters to you more. Does it matter to you more that your child feels good about their work or that your child got an A on their work? Listen, those two things aren't always equal. Or if your child was miserable producing an A. And I've known parents when a kid is really flipped out over a project, I remember one parent didn't let them turn the project in because it had been such a miserable process creating it, and they wanted to teach the lesson that the world will not fall apart over one assignment. And that's a totally different lesson than the excellence and performance that we often think we're supposed to be guiding them towards. So looking at things in different ways. The other thing I talked about was scaffolding, which is also used in education a lot. And I like the fact that it's used in education, and I feel like it should be brought more into parenting and psychology, that you can't kind of get from the ground floor to the top floor of a concept without building. And sometimes you're building and you realize there's something missing and you have to go back and retrofit it, or you find out that this part built itself and so you can leap ahead. And it's the same thing that we want to do with parenting and with our other personality development pieces, is really looking at what's there and what's not. And that might be, for example, why you have different goals for different kids. Because some have more scaffolding, or it's just coming together in a totally different way. You're offering the same thing, but the two kids are totally different. And so looking at scaffolding and how you build your way toward where you want to be. The other piece that we could talk about for hours is self-regulation. And part of this goes with a talk that you might want to think about doing eventually on brain development and just understanding the fight or flight response, because that's really, it's becoming more and more known and understood that, if somebody's having a fight or flight response, whether you think they should be having a fight or flight response, it doesn't matter. But if they're having one, you can't access their higher thinking, like they're stuck, in a different part of the brain. And so that ability to calm down and to self-regulate is really important. So somebody who's mad needs to calm down, and they're not going to calm down if you shout at them, sit down and be quiet, or I need you to calm down. Like, it's a whole, and it's not self-regulation, that's obedience, right? And so there's a big difference. And I think what we're seeing around us in our society is sometimes what happens when people aren't equipped with that. And so I think it's one of the most important tools you can give your kids. It really helps them deal with small stresses, large stresses, disasters, traumas. It's paying attention to how to get yourself at an even keel, even when something really, really hard is happening, that you can find that, especially because we can't always be there for them in the moment when something's going wrong. And so we want to instill in them that capacity to self-regulate, and also to be kind to themselves, and sometimes be like, I can tell you can't possibly concentrate right now, so what do we do when you're like that? And it's very concrete. You get a glass of water, get a cup of tea. Some people they breathe. Sometimes it's so concrete that you are looking at things in the room and you just start naming what you see, so that you can kind of get a different part of your brain active, so that the panic isn't prominent. And so there's different tools that you can use to help with that. But without self-regulation, mastery and all that stuff is really hard to achieve. And one of the strengths in our district is the autism spectrum classroom at Canterbury is phenomenal because they talk about self-regulation and boundaries constantly. Like, you're not expected to start your day without checking in with yourself. And I think that sometimes we miss that. Like, it's not, we all need that. We all need, you know, how are you? Are you here completely? Did you argue with somebody this morning on your way in? Have you eaten? You know, are you worried about something that's going to happen after school or tomorrow or whatever it may be? And sometimes we're just so busy trying to get the things done. And I think teachers are really under so much pressure, you know, that there's less and less time for that social emotional stuff. And that can make it harder because there's just not the space. I think that's all of the, I'm mindful of the time, and each of these things you could talk about separately in a big, big way. But are there certain questions or comments that people have? I know we wanted to do Q&A, so, and we've answered some as we've talked.
I could use a whole session just on self-regulation for me as a parent.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because a whole bunch of my self-regulation went out the window
Yep.
when I gave birth.
Yeah. I think that's it. It is. It's so hard, and you can't really give that to your kids if you don't have it. You know, like if you're fried, it's very hard to be the calming influence. You know, and so figuring out how to, and it's all figuring out what works for you. And what I will say quickly about self-regulation is that anything that's rhythmic is good for you. Walking gets your heart beating in a different way than panic. You know, and like when you feel that tension, just remind yourself, it's my fight or flight response. There's no saber-toothed tiger, whatever it is, it's manageable, and I need to collect myself before I try to do anything that involves executive functioning and decision making. You know, that part of your brain's just not available, and we all know that, right? You get flustered, you lose your keys, you spill. Like, it all happens all together because, like, once it's uncorked, it's really hard to get it back. Go ahead.
How do you help your child deal with bullying in her home and in her environment on a daily basis and maintain her self-regulation? And I mean, seriously, that's a huge deal because that fight or flight is going almost throughout, from the moment their feet hit the floor, they find out they have to go to school, to the moment they get back home.
Oh, okay.
You know, so how do you get them to be able to put that aside, you know, and maintain their academic standing, you know, while they're trying to deal with the fight or flight within their school day? Because that's a really big problem, and it's not just something I'm seeing here, it's something I'm seeing period, because I work with a lot of youth.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And so, there's a couple pieces. One is certainly partnering with the school to the degree that it's possible, knowing full well that they may or may not join you in trying to make it better. What I hear when you say that is I would worry about a child becoming very afraid of going to school and refusing to go to school. And that can uncork like a whole bunch of other difficulties. You want to teach your kids right and wrong. And so you want to say, you're right, this shouldn't be happening. Like, definitely you don't want to be saying, oh, just ignore it, you know, push through, because then you won't have the upstander. I always think of those situations as like practice for when they're older and they have roommates and boyfriends and girlfriends and coworkers, and you want them to, if their fight or flight is going off appropriately, you want to keep that mechanism intact. And because if you tell them you need to let it go, it opens a developmental line of letting things go. And we certainly don't want kids to be leaving themselves vulnerable to unkind people.
Right.
So I think some of that is figuring out exactly what's going on and what you can and can't do at the school, and then being honest with your child that it's not okay, and talk to them about fight or flight, and that, you know, I know you don't like this person, and we can do certain things. We can make sure you don't get buddied up with them. We can make sure your desk isn't next to them, but sometimes you're still gonna have to be in the room with them. There's a myth that everyone in a classroom has to be friends. I think that it's very important to be honest and say there's a difference between friends and community members and classmates. And so tolerating community members and classmates is part of life, but also keeping distance, and that's not an okay person. You shouldn't play with that person again. They weren't kind to you. And what I find helpful is to sometimes say, you guys need a break. You know, if it's a friendship that has meanness, you take a break and you say, you know, some people outgrow this, and so we'll check back in a couple months, but they're not coming over our house, you're not going over their house, or I want you to choose somebody else to play with at recess.
In elementary school,
Mhm.
that works.
Yeah.
In middle school,
It's
no-go.
not.
There is
Okay.
a no-go on that one, and in the high school, it's even worse.
Yeah. Well, it's a different level.
It's a whole nother level,
Yeah.
but, I have found that even with all the appropriate steps, being involved, open communication, and what I'm hearing about it, and she wrote a paper about it to her teacher, so when I read the paper, and it was a lot worse than even what I thought. So, and I'm seeing these red lights going on and off to the
Yeah.
point that, I'm literally watching, you know, my child, like, almost change, you know,
Yeah.
from having an abundance of school spirit and joy and learning to
Mhm.
going the complete opposite direction.
Okay, are you wanting to say something
Well,
to
I
that?
just- and maybe you already did this, but most certainly I would be having my son go to the
Done.
counselor.
Done that, been there, done
Right.
that.
All that stuff.
And I can talk to you more after this. I've been dealing with this for some time. So there are things that I do with my daughter that help her. And one of them is I've been, with regarding bullying in middle school, I've been to not only the principal, but the board. And she came to the meeting. No, she's coming because she's going to see this gets worked through.
Mhm.
And part of it was also be like, I want y'all to look at her face
Right.
when you're coming up with whatever reasonings you have
Right.
that's going on. But that also made her feel empowered. So she came home,
Yes.
and after some of these meetings, and there are times where I'm like, okay, you're here for the first 10 minutes and then kick rocks. So the grown-ups can talk. But I want her to be invested and involved in the process and know that this will not be tolerated, and we're gonna go there. And the one part, I will be honest, I was a little on the fence about, but I figured I went ahead with it. I said, okay, I told the school, if you don't do something, we're gonna go and let the police do something about it.
Right.
And I said, do you want to press charges? I asked her, do you want to do this? I was leaning against it. She said, yes, I do. And I took her to the police station, and we sat there, and she wrote out her statement, and we worked through that. And she got so much more confident after that in handling it, like, I'm not going to take this. And it, like she says, she's talking about scaffolding. It took her building up. She admitted, she was like, I'm nervous about what it
Sure.
takes to come back after. But giving her, empowering her to stand up for yourself. Exactly. And then she came back, she said, you know, some kid told another kid, well, go ahead and hit her. And she was like, I dare you, Mr. Nichols is over there, I'll go get him. Once the staff stepped up and she realized they're trying to help me. Every teacher may not be the best at the anti-bullying thing, but once she realized that she does have people in her corner, more than just her mom, she was more, she said, wow, she's like, I said, dare you, and they left me alone. So that's just,
And if, based on some of
Mom,
our
mom.
experiences, that piece of having choice,
Mhm.
you know, like so often in these bullying situations or other
Yeah.
conflict situations, one of the harmful feelings that come from it is this sense of you have no control, you have no options, everything's being done to you.
Right.
So, as, you know, as a piece of dealing with it, and the problem solving, saying, well, you know, do you have ideas of what you could do or how to handle this? And let them brainstorm the ideas they can think of, and then you add in a few of your own, and then you look at the pool of choices, and you say, which of these do you feel comfortable doing, or which of these would you like to do, or which of these would you like to try first? It gives them back some of that sense of control. It models the problem solving. It lets them know what resources they can work their way through. Does it magically fix everything overnight? No. But that sense of control, and, you know, and that, yes, there are things I can't control, but there are things I can.
yeah.
That
active, and we do use this across, really goes across the lifespan, that no one wants to be passively stuck in a situation. You want to find ways for them to be active. So when kids go through a tragedy, we always look for what can they do to be active, not to just be stuck in how overwhelming and hard it is. And that's something you can apply to adults and kids alike, but you're talking about passive into active, and that's what the empowerment piece is. The other piece that you talked about was when the adults responded more appropriately, she got more centered. And that is a huge piece, and there's something that most therapists know, which is not everyone who goes through a trauma is traumatized by it. Okay, you might have a hard couple of months, you might have a hard couple of years, but the lingering trauma is from the response or the lack of, whether it's systemic or in your family network or within your community. And I think that when you see a kid who feels like they're not being listened to, they're not being honored, they're not being respected, there are times to get that active as an advocate. And I like what you did, because you really role modeled for her. The world is bigger than this building, and there are different ways of handling things, and what happened is just not acceptable, and I'm not going to leave you stuck. If there's one thing that I think we would all say to our kids is, I will never leave you stuck in a really bad situation. It may take work and time to get you out of it. I can't always just reach in and pull you out, but I will work on it, and when they see you work on it, they know that you're on their side. And I do think that there are times where that allegiance to each other is way more important than agreeing with the adults. And I know some administrators may not appreciate that, but I think in the end, your connection is lifelong. And you as an adult siding with other adults doesn't necessarily mean as much as your child's feeling heard and validated. That doesn't mean that when your child has done something wrong, exactly, they don't hold them accountable. Right.
But if it's not something that they are doing or initiating, then, it's important to the children to know that the adults are doing what they're supposed to. And when they feel that the adults are not doing what they're supposed to, even though they know, for them, they're like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do? And they're the kids.
Exactly. And that can be kind of crazy making, right? Because they're like, wait a minute, I know right and wrong better than the adults, or I see how to solve this and the adults aren't taking action. And
Or the adults have rules in place and they're not even following their own rules.
Right.
So, you're saying that this is the consequence of this action. The action is being taken, but the consequences are being administered. So across the board, and that's a problem.
And it gets bigger in middle and high school, not just because the kids are larger and what they can do is meaner, but the other piece of it is that your kids are growing in their capacity for critical thinking. So they can pull out the handbook and say, it's right here. That's not supposed to happen. Right. And so they have a sense that injustice, and so that's part of their burgeoning identity development that's age appropriate, and you do want to support that. One of these kids may be a lawyer someday. Like there's traits that you can see and that you want to support them. And it can be tempting to not want to make waves, but at the same rate, you can see where for your daughter it got better because of the actions that you took as a family, that she felt empowered, and that didn't address the meanness of the person who was doing it. It was empowerment in her, and sometimes that's the best you can do. If it's not going to be dealt with on a systemic level, you may not change the way they handle the kids who offend, but you can address your kids and how they respond, and that they know that there's always another level of action that can be taken. And certainly if it gets to the point of where it feels like if it's a fear of school or school refusal, that's something that does require much more attention, because that's the kind of thing that just gets bigger and bigger unless there's bigger help. And I'm happy to talk with you more about that too. I know we're past 7:30. I'm happy to still talk. Really? Oh, well, good. Good job. It's a prompt. That's to our front page. But if there's anything else that people want to talk about, I can also stay for a little bit and talk more individually. I love talking with parents about their kids, obviously, and there's so much. It feels good when you sit in a room and everybody's so different than each other, but in the end, we are all wanting the same thing for our kids, and I think that gives me a lot of hope for the world around us. So, if you didn't do it already, go back to your 3 qualities and come up with a way to remind yourself. And we have the event on Facebook, so you can even update us and let us know if you're able to give it a try, because it does make a big difference if you can find a way to remind yourself. Otherwise, this is just going to be one of those things you went to and you don't really remember what we talked about, but you liked it. So, okay. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. At this time, thank you so much for coming. Before you guys go, I wanted to have Erica Chafin come up. She's our Heights Middle PTA president to speak on social emotional behavior.
I'm gonna get my cheat sheets.
Okay, she'll be right back.
It's right here. So we actually have several of the steering team here for the Social Emotional Task Force. Joan and Jen, Tiara, Christy, Julie, and I. Did I forget anyone? No, okay, good. So the Social Emotional Task Force is a team of district stakeholders like us, parents, teachers, and community members that are dedicated to the implementation and continuity of programs that supports the social emotional health of our district. We started as a subcommittee of the Heights Middle School PTA, and our mission is to...
Okay. Number 1, strengthen relationships with agencies skilled in the fields of behavioral and mental health, mindfulness, gun safety, and prevention of dating violence, sexual assault, and bullying. Number 2, bring services and programs to our district that are affordable and evidence-based in order to support the district's vision for our community of excellence. 3, introduce multi-year MOUs between social service agencies in our district to streamline services to students. 4, further address bullying, sexual assault, dating violence, mental health, behavioral and gun safety needs in our community by offering programs in the school setting. And 5, facilitate communication between parents and administrators as they work to reach common goals with practical, effective solutions.
So one of our first projects was to offer free meditation and yoga for all of the educators and support staff at the middle school. So we offered 16 free sessions over 4 weeks of free yoga, or they could come to free meditation. So, and that was paid for through Heights Middle PTA Fund. So one of our goals that Julie is spearheading is to train Heights educators through mindful classrooms, which brings that self-regulation piece into the classroom. And children who have experienced that and districts that have implemented that have found in some cases a 35% reduction in like behavior problems, being off task, that's improved. So there's definite evidence-based research that we're using to pick the programs. The other thing we're going to do shortly is offer free yoga and meditation for students, also after school. But we want to keep it in the classroom as much as possible so that all students can attend, because we don't have a bus for late students yet. So another thing that we want to add to all of this is, just making sure that like policies match what's happening in the school. So things like dress code, like, okay, can you show me the policy for that? So just like Sherry was talking about, having our kids, be assertive for themselves and teaching them that, we're going to help them along the way, because I think we're just learning also, how to communicate without like, upsetting the apple cart, but like still getting things done. We all want the same things. So if you want more information, or if you want to join we've only had one meeting so far. Because we're all busy doing when we have time, like Kirsten went and had met with someone, Julie went and met with someone. Tiara's been doing work, and Jen and Joan work as part of PTA Council. So, thank you for coming tonight. I thought this was wonderful. So let's just get Sherry on here.
Thank you, Erica and Ms. Walker. Thank you guys for coming out tonight. We appreciate you coming out. The next speaker series is with Dr. Romack, and he'll be speaking on equity. So that's November 27th, and it is part of the PTA leadership and unit, which are all of our schools. So, and that'll be held here at Heights. So thank you guys for coming out, and hope you can join us again. Thank you.